Welcome to a new episode of Mind Your Mind, the podcast dedicated to all frontline workers around the world. I am Roxana Parra Sepúlveda, your host, and today I am delighted to be with Dr. Nicola Diamond. She is currently working in her clinical private practice, including online, doing lectures for universities, the International Attachment Network, and psychotherapy organizations. Plus, she also examines in PhDs. She worked as a clinician for many years at the Helen Bamber Foundation with survivors of trafficking and torture. Also as a psychotherapist for the former Women Therapy Centre in London, and has published widely on psychoanalysis and the body, trauma and attachment. And I will ensure to share with all of you as well, hopefully all the links to her books. But first of all, Nicola, welcome. And thank you so very much for being here with me today.
Hello, Roxana. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so excited because we have been preparing for this conversation for a while. And there is so much that we want to unfold in this conversation, especially because we will be talking about topics that touch personally the life of the therapists and advisors, of people that are supporting others. And the initial question, I think we just go for it. And the initial question is to understand, what does the wounded healer mean? What are we talking about when we talk about the wounded healer?
Well, I suppose a wounded healer is someone who's experienced the adversities of life, who has experienced trauma, suffering, difficulties, and may well have got stuck sometimes in them. And I suppose a lot of us are wounded healers, and one of the many ideas is that people are attracted to the caring professions, mainly because they are wounded healers. And deep down, usually unconsciously, they're looking to find some help for themselves and often provide help for others that they really have always wanted, but never had that perfect or good enough other to give them that help that they've really needed. But there's good and bad to it, and I'm going to argue for the good in it. I can go on a little bit more if you'd like to add on to that.
Yeah, no problem. We will be going in depth in all of these, because with just that first explanation you have given us, it comes to my mind so many times that I have spoken about why people get into the caring professions. And more than once I have come across answers like you just said, someone that have had adverse situations in life that would have loved to have the support that they are providing to their clients or their service users, but they didn't have the experience. And that is in itself becomes like a mean or a way to heal themselves, as you were saying, no? And get that gratification of seeing others getting the support that they didn't receive.
Yeah.
In that there are goods and bads, as you say.
John Bowlby was a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist whose specialism is attachment. And he talks about the compulsive caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
And this is somebody who has almost an obsession with caretaking. And really what you're doing there is looking after others in the way that you really want to be looked after and even loved. And it's a big confusion where you fail to differentiate yourself from the other, and you're actually pushing into the other what you want and what you need, but thinking it's only for the other. And in a way, that is what I think brought around this series, because this series is about how the carer can take care of themselves And it's very important for us to have a sense of what we need and what we want, and be able to own that this is ours and not the others, in order to help the other. And we can get out of a compulsive caretaking, where we can do a caretaking that is actually aware of the other and not confusing ourselves. And for that, I think we need to put the other first. In the sense that we need to say, when we're working with others, we're asking, how does my experience, how can I draw on it in a certain kind of way to lend myself but to the other, but think about the other's experience and the other's life in its uniqueness, and not to constantly differentiate between what is me and what is the other. So we're using our experience, but we're using it to help somebody else. And one way we have to begin is own what we need and own how to look after ourselves, which is what one understanding of what we're doing in this series.
And definitely. And is the encouragement to everybody that is listening to go into that very process of starting to understand what their needs are, so they know what are they drawing into every time, and how every time they are working with someone that is suffering, and how that is also related to themselves. How do you think then those personal experiences of adversity of the carer can be useful for the work?
Yes. Well, I think one of the things is, how can we help someone if we can't go to the dark places ourselves? We have to be able to engage with these difficult parts of experience. We need to be able to engage with our own experiences of loss, with our own experiences of vulnerability, with our own physical pains, with our own psychological pains. And if we can't go there, how can we be the guide or the helper to help someone go through their own experience? Because if we can't tolerate it, how can we help another person tolerate it? And in tolerating these difficult experiences is part of, with another person, is part of being a good therapist, because you can't deal with anything if you're not facing it. And it's a very sort of general statement, which is, you have to face the fear itself. Many people have said that in a variety of ways. But you do need to be able to, because if you can't face something very uncomfortable, how can you deal with it? How can you put it into thought? And if you don't find a way of putting it into an understanding, then how can you need to be able to do that in order to work with the experience and to change it. If you can't name it, you can't change it. And this brings us on to different kinds of therapists that have been around. Wilfred Bion talked about the experience of revelry. He related that to how a mother can tolerate very difficult experiences that the baby may be having. But she can't help that baby if she can't be there with that baby in being with those difficult experiences. And similarly, us as therapists, we need to be able to be there. The other thing we need to be able to do is not be immersed in experiences. It's not being immersed in our own personal experiences. The ability to see from other people's perspectives as well, to be able to look outside ourselves and to take different points of view. Because if we're using our own feeling states, but we're immersed in it, we tend to think other people feel and think like us.
Yeah. So in that case, when we are recognizing the feelings or ideas or emotions that are coming up for us while we are with the client, then that is a piece of information. But we need to be aware of, is this piece of information about myself or is about the other person, and how we can then broaden, as you say, the perspective, not only ours as the person that is helping to find meaning and understanding, but also for the client or the patient that is with us as therapists, for example, trying to find meaning as well to what's going on.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, a constant questioning, like differentiating, is this me or is this the other? And what way is the other different from me? How can I engage with that difference? Is very helpful to be doing. It's a kind of process of monitoring oneself when one's with other people.
Yes.
The notion in attachment theory of the earned secure, you know, there's this idea in attachment theory of people that are secure. Now, people who are secure are usually more able not to be so preoccupied with their own pain, because in some ways they've had a good enough upbringing, good enough experience of care to be able to care for others. But if you're securely attached, you've had a good enough environment. With earned secure, you've had it tough. You've had to find your own way through those difficulties and develop a security through a process of maturation, through dealing with adversity and finding ways around it. And I think an earned secure can be very helpful as a therapist, because they're people who've had to go through the wars, find unique ways of coming out of it, and having the complexity of understanding that emerges from that process. It's not just the experience of adversity that makes the difference. It's how we manage that adversity, and most importantly, how we reflect emotionally on that adversity. And again, if we look at attachment theory, there's something called the adult attachment interview that Mary Main thought about. And in that interview, she looks at how, when we reflect on our experiences of adversity, that type of reflection helps us have a depth of understanding and being able to use adversity as something we can learn something from, as opposed to being caught up in it. And again, she finds that the kind of reflection that is helpful is this ability to take, be aware of other people's points of view, not only our own. So when we look at our own history, we can sort of look at why our parents were so disturbed. What happened to them intergenerationally that created such disturbances? And if we're in a relationship with a partner that's very difficult, we can step, a bit into their shoes. It's sort of, we're not completely stepping into anyone else's shoes, but we're able to try and understand from their position, from their history, what's happening. And that ability to have that flexibility to move around, it also relates to what's been called in the profession mentalization. I don't like that word very much, because it sounds like we're all only sort of disembodied minds, and actually we've got bodies. And not only that, this mental process is always in an interaction with other people in a world. But in terms of what mentalization means, it's the ability to understand another person's point of view, and really engage in that as part of an ongoing learning process.
And so many important, for me personally, the concept of earned security or earned secure is such a hopeful and positive sort of concept, because it does talk about the possibility that we have to find understanding of others and ourselves through reflection. And that is always also here, for those that have heard other episodes, that we are always calling for those spaces of reflection. For every frontline worker that is out there to gain those spaces of reflection that help them to give meaning and to make sense of their personal experiences, and also to make sense of the way that they see themselves somehow affected by listening and witnessing the stories of horror, of pain, of their patients, clients, service users, right? So it's something very important then there that is related to that reflection that will help us to have an understanding of ourselves, but others as well. And keeping in mind the mind of the other. And we are not only talking about, as you said, no, it's not fully staying in the shoes of the other person, but at least having I think the understanding is what comes to mind as well while I'm listening to you, Nicola, today, with this very point in terms of finding a face in the fears, but also understanding what is the impact of that fear and how that fear or how those emotions that are within us based on our personal experiences can get triggered by witnessing the suffering and the experiences of our clients as well, because that happens for sure. And I'm sure everybody that is listening will very quickly go to that client that make them feel or remind them someone or a situation and so on. And that's another element, no, that sometimes there may be a potential difficulty for the carer that could find, while they are doing their job, in those moments in which a patient or a client or someone that they are working with is presenting a situation that you may find yourself saying, oh, that happened to me. That sounds so similar to that. I was there. That had happened to me too, you know?
Absolutely.
And what do they do there? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the problems with that type of situation is that you're kind of mirroring, you're seeing it as the same, and it obviously triggers off possibly a repeat of a pattern of distress that you're very familiar with, and that gets activated. You can also get over-identified with people that you're working with, where you see their stress as magnifying your own stress. And it sort of reminds me of sort of an idea of a therapist who cries more than her patient, when they're in the same room. And that's not helpful. And it's something actually that parents often do with children. They see their child in distress and they get overprotective. That's a response of a parent to a child. But it's not always helpful. Sometimes it's helpful to give that child space. So I'm relating it to a parental situation as well as a therapeutic one. What we need to do is not to get caught up in that mirroring. Just to hold on, just to ask ourselves that differentiation question. What's mine? What's the others? In psychoanalytic trainings, we talk about the countertransference. And it's very important for us to be constantly aware of our process in the countertransference. And the countertransference can mean two things. It can mean one way that I think is helpful for us today is when what our patient or what our client is talking about activates our own stuff, and we own that this is our own stuff. That's being aware of the countertransference, that you're aware that it's your own stuff. So it's again the self-other, the me-you, and it's a constant ongoing process, a question that we have to ask ourselves, and that helps us out of that process of mirroring, which is unhelpful, and it can bring up things like when you're sort of saying, you kind of start to want to disclose. your own stuff, because you're very keen to get in with your own experience, because it's about a need in you to communicate. Now, sometimes self-disclosure can have its uses, but it has to be very carefully deployed. And so often when that urge comes, we need to resist it, because it's usually something about our need to explain something about ourselves, which then may not be relevant at all for the other person, who comes from a different context. You know, we've taken one state of being out of that overall context, which is theirs, not ours. And we keep having to go back into the context which is relevant for them.
Absolutely. And also, even if the advisor or nurse or worker or therapist is observing a situation that they look at, this is what happened to me, they don't lose sight of the person that they are supporting, no? And that is that constant ongoing work, as you say. And it's interesting because while I'm listening to you, although we are talking about a therapeutic context, I think this is totally applicable to everybody that is working with others suffering for whatever reason.
Oh, completely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel that's why I feel that these concepts and these ideas that we are talking about today are so important to make them sort of known to other professionals as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so amazing how things that are often considered obvious are the very things that no one ever talks about and actually ends up being blind to. And this is why this series is so important, because we're saying it directly so that we can hear it, you know.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will stimulate frontline workers as well to start that process of finding those reflective spaces with someone else and finding meaning and understanding as well. What will you say is the role of empathy in this context of in which the client may bring a story or a situation that is very similar to the story of the therapist or the advocate?
Yeah. Well, I think empathy is one of those confusing terms, because it can give us the idea that we can really step into someone else's shoes. And I think we have to respect the difference. We are using empathy when we're using our wounded life experiences. We're drawing on that to try and understand others, and to try and understand them on an emotional level. And we're using our emotions to do that. But we're also aware of our limitations in that. And it's about always open to the difference, hearing the other's story, hearing the other and learning from the other. You know, there's an analyst called Patrick Casement who wrote a book called Learning from the Patient. But what he means by that is we need to learn from the other. We need to really be humble in the face of the other. And that brings us back to the positivity of vulnerability, owning our vulnerabilities and being humble, having humility, and always allowing for that space.
And I think that also being able to get in touch with that vulnerability and understanding those experiences and being able to sort of extract the learning from those experiences from the past to understand the suffering of others can also be a very positive approach to the work that we are doing. I mean, is a way of also using those adverse experiences into a different way. But in order to get there, we need to go through the pain. Pain and the process of facing the fear, as you were saying earlier,
I mean,
no?
It's it's almost like when you've gone through something awful, sometimes people say, well, it's the best thing that ever happened to you, when it's the most horrific thing that could ever happen to anybody. But we create something constructive out of these very negative experiences, and in that journey we learn so much. I mean, we learn to tolerate the intolerable. Well, we try to name the intolerable. We don't always find it tolerable, but we also try to make sense of something out of it, and we try to process it, and we try and use our experience to help others. I mean, that's always the creative process is to provide something for the world, for other people. It could be a work of art. It doesn't have to be only in, verbal communication or even non-verbal communication, but something creative that is productive.
Definitely. And understanding those vulnerabilities and knowing those vulnerabilities and limitations, I'll also think that help us to know and identify where is when we do need the support, some kind of support, where is the needs for us, which is essential to be able to don't burn out, to don't go into that line of burnout, and actually find, because sometimes to talk about limitations or vulnerability have a very negative connotation. And I'm definitely feeling here in our conversation that is a lot of positives there, because there is a lot of information about ourselves in that too, no? Yeah.
I think it is very positive, but it can be understood very negatively. But I think owning that we require others, and we are very, we're relational, and we need support from others is absolutely crucial. And it's about having a community that we require.
And that community sometimes can be from your own profession, your own colleagues, could be a community out of work. We have spoken in previous episodes as well about the importance of the community and how community can be healing in itself, and having variety as well in the communities that we belong to, that will definitely combat isolation, and that in itself can be very, very useful for our general well-being.
Yeah, well, I wanted to sort of relate that to the way we think about therapy, because there's a more popular way of thinking about therapy, which is about trying to make us feel better, trying to make us be happy. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying to make us feel happy and trying to make us feel better. But there's also phrases like, become the better form, the best form of me. But it can get quite insular looking and quite me-ish. Yes. And I'm thinking about a kind of therapy that is looking more outwards as well, and that really recognizes the importance of, seeing people through their difficulties and but using it to help us be more able to relate to others, and to help us think more altruistically about existence and the world. And I think one of the problems about therapy in a very post-capitalist culture that is, thinking, encourages us to think only in terms of the me, the self, and power and success. It doesn't help us to address the importance of vulnerability, the importance of thinking about the other, and that the aim isn't just about self-improvement. It's about improving our relationships with others and the world in which we live. And that is always connected ultimately to the so-called improvement of the so-called self.
Yes. And you make me think as well in so many ways about something that we were touching with Dimitra in previous episodes, about how and others in other episodes as well, about how, for example, a frontline worker that is a parent or has parental responsibilities can then transition from a very busy, painful day at work, witnessing a lot of difficult situations, and then be emotionally available for their children. Considering what you're saying, you know that in the end, those relationships have a very important impact on others and in the world, in the societies that we live, the societies of the future as well, no? So how the situation of our frontline workers now will be impacting the society of the future.
Yeah.
It comes to mind with what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, maybe it's a bit like, it's the focus, it's like an intense focus on what we need to learn in a way. You know, when you're at the most extremes of adversity, we sometimes learn most, you know, from those experiences, because it brings up so much with such intensity.
Indeed. So the big question is how our vulnerabilities can become our strengths. No, I think what we're saying here is inviting people to find those spaces where they feel safe and start to face their fears and the pain of the past in a way, no?
Yeah. But it's seeing it in a very hopeful and constructive way. Because if you face and when you face those sort of fears and difficulties, and you share, it's very important. You know, now there's also an interest in, you know, when we dream, you can have groups where you social dream together, and how you actually can share these very adverse experiences, and how that creates a kind of container for that experience when it becomes a group experience. That's a way in which you can work with vulnerability in a group setting, when people have had a lot of adversity, and they can come together and try to support each other, but in an experiential way.
Because
but I think
sorry to interrupt you. I think that the experience of the group taught us well in that what we are saying of hearing and seeing and listening the experiences of others can also broaden our perception of situations and experiences in our own life, no? And in that way can be quite fruitful and quite useful to find understanding as well of ourselves.
Well, I think often we feel so alone. You know, although we inhabit the world with others, we feel so isolated when we're in great distress. And the ability to feel that actually I'm not alone and that I can share this, it makes me feel, and also I can communicate to people about it, and it's understood. It's very, very helpful.
Yes, because I think one of the things that comes to my mind as well is something that I read about Bowlby saying that in the end, the contact that when we are with another, is a human connection. We are with a fellow human being, and we go down to that very basic level of connection, really. And from there is where we can start to hear each other, understand each other, validate each other, understand the difference of our experiences and so on, no? And find ourselves and the other in the process.
Yes. I mean, I think we also need to mention that when people have had great adversity, sometimes it's very hard to feel bound into relationships with others, because you've had so many broken experiences. Sometimes you've not ever had the possibility of establishing a safe enough relationship. So in those sorts of situations, although relationships are essential and very important, it's also really tough to feel connected and engaged. But again, having the sensitivity about that, if you are a wounded healer that's used your wounded healing to help other people in a positive and helpful way, you know, you can make it, you can really get that, you get it. And I think when people feel that you've got it, when you've understood, even if it can't be completely resolved, that's a great beginning.
Absolutely. Definitely. Yes. I agree with you. Yes. Definitely. From experience and from, what you're saying, it just touched my heart as a therapist and working with so many people as well that are suffering or have suffered around the world, no? Do you think normally in these episodes we think about actions, no? Because we are throwing a little bit of theory, we are thinking together here today, Nicola, and I was wondering what can be an action to start in the process of making our vulnerabilities become our strengths?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I suppose I was thinking of it very similarly to what I've already said, you know, which is, you know, the stuff but I think in terms of, you know, action, social action, or I think it's, you know, setting up more modern kinds of contemporary therapies and trainings, but also in doing that, thinking about how we work. I mean, I know that you're quite interested in work within the community, within actual people's lives, you know, not having the specialized consulting room or wherever, the spaces that aren't set apart from the lived world and the lived experiences, you know, and working with being a member of a group, you know, no longer the authoritative therapist other, but an active member of a group, but a bit more perhaps like not the ultimately wise person, but the person who might have had a bit more lived learning experience to facilitate individuals and groups in lived modes of being, rather than separating therapy out from the world that
absolutely
we are engaged in.
Yes, because because also I think what comes to mind with the actions that you're mentioning is not only about being part of a group and how do we stand in that the position that we take within a group, no, and to have understanding of that as well, but also is something about training and how the different institutions are having probably or stimulating these conversations that we are having today for social workers, for nurses, for technicians, for people that are doing the administrative work in the trauma services, you know. Absolutely. And to understand that to work from a trauma-informed place, from a trauma-informed approach is quite important, because that will also help us to understand better where are we standing when we are supporting others. And I think that is a big challenge for the organizations, the teaching organizations, universities, and so on, but also for the organizations in which we are working in, no? Because here we are both of us talking about the importance of understanding our limitations and vulnerabilities, but naturally a manager of a service will be more focused on delivery, no? Yeah. And so what is the role or the space? I think the question for me, from what we are reflecting today, is what is the role then of organizations in creating those spaces and those possibilities for their workers to eventually get involved either in personal therapy or group work or reflective practice groups or any place where they can feel safe enough to get into that process of understanding of how their practice and themselves get impact by the work that they are doing every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Nicola, thank you so very much for today. It's really, I've been looking forward to have this conversation with you, because I very much appreciate your wisdom and the clarity in which you always explain all these concepts that seems to be in a cloud somehow. And it's important to talk about them clearly for everybody. Hopefully all our frontline workers understanding it.
Yeah, when all these concepts, they're, if you live it and you get it from actually experience, they're no longer abstract concepts. They're part of what we mean when we feel it like that or think it like that, and making this sort of more abstract area much more part of everyday lived experience.
Yes, and everyday work as well for those that are out there. And the last thing that we have to remind everybody is to share this episode if you have found it particularly useful and you think any of your colleagues can be benefiting as well from understanding better all what we are talking about today. That will be amazing. Give us a like or share it, and let's spread the word, because I think there is a lot of work to do yet to carry on supporting and encouraging frontline workers to develop their personally meaningful self-care strategies in this very busy and world that we are living in. So thank you so very much, Nicola, for being here with me today and helping me to do exactly what we intended to do today.
Well, thank you, Roxana, for your very interesting communication today. It was great.